6 past the hour. Live look at Times Square in New York City on this Thursday morning. Joining us now, senior reporter for ProPublica, Jesse Eisinger. Jesse has the cover story in the new issue of The Atlantic, asking the question, what's inside America's banks? And he writes in part this, quote, for the past 4 years, the nation's political leaders and bankers have made enormous, in some cases unprecedented efforts to save the financial industry, clean up the banks, and reform regulation in order to restore trust and confidence in the American financial system. This hasn't worked. Banks today are bigger and more opaque than ever, and they continue to behave in many of the same ways they did before the crash. And your article goes on to take a look deep inside one of the nation's largest banks.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what you found is not going to make any of us feel that comfortable.
No, it'll be terrifying. I mean, the point that we have is that it's not just that the average person doesn't trust the banks anymore. We sort of knew that. But our point is that everyone who actually knows something doesn't trust them either. So we're talking about sophisticated investors, the accounting experts, even bankers themselves, regulators. They don't trust them, and they don't trust them because they can't understand their financial disclosures.
And you call them a house of cards. Tell us the bank you looked into and what you found.
Sure. So what we did was we did an adventure, a sort of Dante-esque adventure into Wells Fargo's annual report. Okay. Wells Fargo is a sort of solid American name, an icon.
Sure,
we picked it because it's the simplest big bank, the most conservative big bank. And what we found is that the financials are truly incomprehensible and full of terrifying things like $2.8 trillion worth of derivatives exposure and $1.5 trillion worth of off-balance sheet entities that are similar to what Enron was using.
Oh my God.
Trading profits that are completely opaque and not disclosed particularly
How did you do
accurately.
this, first of all? I mean, this is...
We read the fine print. We read everything in the annual report, and then we talked to experts and said, we can't make head or tail of this. Can you? And they said no. I mean, we talked to one of the people who actually creates accounting standards. And I said, do you trust bank accounting? He said, absolutely not.
Oh my God.
I mean, it was. I read the piece last night, Jesse. It's really great. A real tour de force. And it is scary because when you have a bank like J.P. Morgan with Jamie Dimon, who's supposedly the most astute bank CEO, and then they have a problem, a $6 billion problem with the London whale, with a huge loss like that. It truly is scary. And I'm wondering, at the end, you sort of talk about solutions because you see this huge problem. Well, what the hell can we do about it?
Yeah.
And where do you come off on that? A lot of people want to separate trading from traditional banking. Is that the solution you see?
Well, those are part of the solution. Frank Partnoy, my co-author, and I had sort of two solutions. One is that bankers have to go to prison when they are reckless. We have not had a single major banker go to prison in the wake of the financial crisis, and I think there was substantial wrongdoing. So there has to be a real risk. But you couple that with an ability and a requirement for them to make plain language, simple disclosures. And you could actually create something of a grand bargain here, I think, where you swept away a lot of the redundant regulation in exchange for saying you have to disclose your risks in meaningful ways that a layperson, a sophisticated, smart layperson, but a layperson nonetheless, could understand.
So, but isn't that what the naive question is? The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau does? I mean, where does what the Obama administration has put in place to protect consumers square with what you found?
Right. Well, what happened was that I increasingly think that the Dodd-Frank financial reform, which created the CFPB, is a failure. And it's been a failure in part because banking lobbying has layered in enormous amount of complexity and exceptions. And you can see this most in the rules called the VOCA rule, which was to try to ban proprietary trading trading, where banks take bets with their own money and taxpayers take the downside. And right now, there are exemptions that you can drive huge semis through, and it rendered the rules meaningless. And instead, what we have is layers and layers and layers of complexity. The regulators, unfortunately, are smart. We think of them as sort of government bureaucrats, but in fact, they're very smart, and they're too smart for their own good. So what they do is they think that they can anticipate all these banks' problems and try to allow certain things but exempt other things, and they can't do that well.
Yeah, I mean, you have those, the more rules, the easier it is actually for banks to circumvent them. One of the themes of this morning's program is sort of a minority that's able to block the greater good,
exactly.
It seems. So you have all these people now who say that this is a real problem, that banks should be broken up. For instance, bank CEOs themselves, some of them are at least former ones.
Right.
So who is it that's blocking this, and how are they able to do it?
Well, I think the current banks themselves don't want to do it because opacity really helps their businesses. Opacity helps trading. These guys are increasingly trading, and trading is a zero-sum game. I win, you lose. Lending is a win-win game. I get money when you do well. And so as you move to trading, you have an interest both in covering up your actions, disclosing less, and in treating your customer like they're a mark. And so they're benefiting. And then, of course, accountants and lobbyists and lawyers
Before you go, bring this down to the consumer.
Sure.
And how they are impacted by what you found.
So there are two problems in the crisis of trust. One is that they're a drag on the economy. Banks are the transmission mechanism for lending.
For everything.
Right now in the mortgage market, we actually have price gouging. Everybody thinks that mortgage rates are really low.
Right.
But in fact, they're not as low as they should be because they're controlled by a very few number. Wells and JP Morgan essentially control the market, while Citi and Bank of America are withdrawing. They're withdrawing because their own bank executives don't trust their banks, don't understand what's inside their banks, and they've lost kind of confidence.
So the consumer will not get...
So the consumer is not getting enough of a break. The consumer's paying too much on their mortgage. Even though you think you're paying a low rate, you're not paying the proper rate, and that means you have less money in your pocket to spend, which is a drag on all of us because the economy's got this sort of weight behind it. Second problem is that there's dry rot in the foundation, and the least wind will blow a bank down, and that could be a big crisis.
Okay, this is a must-read. What's inside America's banks? Great work. Jesse Eisinger, thank you so much for coming in. Come back soon. We really appreciate it. Coming up, Andy takes